In the heart of a Montana blizzard, barreling across Highway 2, cars were buried beneath ice. People scrambled to find refuge at distant gas stations. Liam Carter, a single dad in a beat-up pickup truck, slammed on his brakes to avoid hitting a spinning SUV. Glass shattered, and frigid air rushed into the cab. He forced the door open, pulled out an unconscious woman, wrapped her in his coat, and dragged her to an abandoned cabin. Little did he know, this woman was Audrey Sterling, the CEO who was scheduled to sign his termination papers the very next morning. The Montana winter stretched across the valley like a stark white burial shroud. It was the kind of cold that gnawed at your bones and turned your breath into a visible vapor. Highway 2 sliced through the desolate landscape, connecting the quiet town of Ridgemont to the Sterling Dynamics Montana plant, a massive facility that operated around the clock, supplying components to aerospace manufacturers across 3 continents. In this world, defined by stark contrasts, warmth battled cold, individuals struggled against powerful systems, and simplicity was pitted against overwhelming power. Liam Carter, at 36, worked the night shift as a mechanic at the Montana plant. He'd once been someone with greater aspirations, a former aviation maintenance engineer. But he'd turned his back on that life after a family tragedy irrevocably changed his perspective. Now, he lived by a straightforward personal code. Do the right thing, even when nobody's watching. His days revolved around keeping machines functioning and ensuring his daughter's safety. These 2 missions demanded everything he had to give. His hands were rough, marked by the calluses of honest labor, with grease permanently embedded in the lines of his palms. He drove a 12-year-old Ford pickup with over 200,000 miles on the odometer, delivered packages on a contract basis during the daylight hours, and then clocked in at the plant when darkness fell. The grueling double shifts ensured there was food on the table and paid for Bridget's school supplies. Bridget Carter, a bright 7-year-old, spent most evenings at their kitchen table, constructing wind turbine models from salvaged metal scraps and cardboard. Her small fingers were surprisingly nimble. She adored her father with the unconditional love that only children can possess. She drew pictures of cozy fireplaces with meticulous crayon strokes and wrote beneath them in slightly shaky letters, "Warm beats storm." Her second-grade teacher had described her as gifted. Liam simply called her his reason for living. But the plant harbored secrets that Liam couldn't perceive, underlying currents moving beneath the surface, like ice silently forming on a winter lake. In a gleaming glass tower, hundreds of miles away, executives scrutinized spreadsheets with detached precision, and a decision had been made to eliminate 11% of the night shift. Audrey Sterling was 34. Possessing a sharp, sophisticated beauty that reflected her expensive tastes. She exuded the calculated coldness of someone who had learned that warmth invites vulnerability. As the CEO of Sterling Dynamics, she bore the immense pressure of quarterly expectations, board mandates for 7% profit margin increases, and a media eager to portray her as a ruthless woman who had inherited her father's empire. She hadn't inherited anything, she'd earned everything, degree by degree, project by project, soul-hardening decision by soul-hardening decision. The board demanded results. The shareholders wanted growth. The efficiency consultants craved blood. So, Audrey had come to Montana in secrecy, traveling under the guise of a routine inspection. Her true mission was known only to a select inner circle, to pinpoint where to make cuts deep enough to appease the demanding stakeholders without irreparably harming the company. She fervently believed in performance metrics, much like some people believe in sacred texts. Numbers didn't lie. Systems showed no favoritism. If you couldn't demonstrate your value on a spreadsheet, perhaps you didn't have any value at all. It was a philosophy that had propelled her into the executive suite by the age of 32. However, it was also a philosophy that kept her awake at 3 a.m., wondering what her father would think if he could see her now. Clinton Morris, the chief operating officer, had already laid the groundwork, manipulating data points to paint certain workers as expendable. He needed sacrificial lambs to justify his own cost-cutting initiatives, bodies to demonstrate his unwavering commitment to efficiency. His emails to Amanda Pierce in Human Resources were clinical, devoid of any trace of human empathy. Henry Blake, the chief financial officer, spoke in the cold language of formulas and fiscal quarters. To him, people were simply line items, benefits were considered overhead, and safety protocols were deemed expensive inconveniences that eroded profit margins. But Otis Palmer, the plant floor manager, a man who had spent 4 decades within those very walls, understood what the spreadsheets couldn't reveal. He knew that cutting back on night maintenance wasn't just trimming excess fat, it was severing critical arteries. He knew that aging equipment required experienced hands, that safety systems demanded vigilant eyes, and that certain knowledge couldn't be acquired from a training manual. On Audrey's laptop, concealed within an encrypted folder she hadn't yet opened, was a document titled Phase 1 Reductions. Liam Carter's name appeared on line 17. The radio in Liam's truck crackled with news of a female CEO conducting surprise inspections at the Montana facilities. He lowered the volume, focusing his attention on the road and on getting home to Bridget. The sky had transitioned from grey to charcoal, and the weather service was escalating warnings to emergency levels. The blizzard struck Highway 2 with relentless force, reducing visibility to almost nothing in a matter of seconds. Audrey's rented SUV, a top-of-the-line model equipped with all-wheel drive and every conceivable electronic safety feature that Detroit could engineer, was rendered virtually useless against the treacherous black ice and gale-force winds that were capable of pushing 40-ton trucks sideways. Her phone displayed no signal. Her GPS flickered and then died. The last thing she could recall was the glare of headlights, the sickening sensation of spinning, and the dashboard rushing toward her face. Liam spotted the hazard lights first, a weak, pulsating amber beacon in the blinding whiteout. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving, to get home, to get safe, but his foot instinctively found the brake pedal instead. It was muscle memory from a past life, when he had been the kind of person who ran toward problems while others ran away. He left the engine idling, pulled his collar up, and stepped out into a wind that tried to physically push him backward. The SUV sat at a precarious 45-degree angle, its front end buried in a snowdrift, the driver's side door crumpled like a discarded piece of aluminum foil. Through the cracked windshield, he could make out a woman slumped against the deployed airbag, a trickle of blood running from a cut above her eye. Liam's toolbox yielded a pry bar. He wedged it into the door frame, put his weight behind it, and felt the metal protest and finally give way. The woman's seat belt had locked, trapping her against the seat. He pulled out his knife, sawed through the nylon strap, and caught her as she fell forward. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, located a pulse, steady but weak. She was breathing. That was enough. He stripped off his red flannel coat, the one Bridget had excitedly picked out at the thrift store because "it looks like fire, Daddy," and wrapped it around the unconscious woman. The fabric was still warm from his body heat, and he carefully tucked it tightly around her shoulders before lifting her into his arms. The abandoned hunting cabin was located about 200 yards off the highway, down a trail known only to the locals. Liam had driven past it 1,000 times, but he'd never had a reason to use it until now. He kicked the door open with his boot, laid the woman gently on the floor near the stone fireplace, and immediately got to work. Dry alcohol tablets from his emergency kit quickly got a fire going. Old newspapers someone had left behind served as kindling. Within 10 minutes, orange light flickered across the rough-hewn walls, and a welcome warmth began to push back the encroaching cold. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Her first instinct was to regain control. You could see it in the way her hand moved to check for her phone, her bag, her files, but none of that was here. There was only the firelight, a stranger, and the sound of the wind trying to rip the world apart outside. "Your name?" Her voice came out as a raw rasp, damaged by the cold and the shock. "Liam," he replied. She studied him through a haze of pain and confusion, making calculations he couldn't decipher. "I'm Audrey," she stated. She didn't offer a last name. That simple omission changed everything and nothing. Liam noticed her wrist was already swelling, the joint at an unnatural angle that made him wince. He found a straight piece of wood from the kindling pile, tore strips from an old blanket, and fashioned a makeshift splint with the kind of resourceful improvisation that came from years of making broken things work. His hands were surprisingly gentle despite their roughness, and Audrey found herself watching those hands more intently than his face. "Do you have someone waiting for you?" Liam asked, adding another log to the fire. Audrey almost laughed, waiting as if anyone in her life operated on something as old-fashioned as waiting. "No, you?" "My daughter. She's 7. Obsessed with wind turbines." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "Builds them out of scrap parts. Says she's going to power the whole valley someday." Audrey felt something crack inside her chest. Just a hairline fracture, easily ignored. When was the last time someone had spoken to her about dreams instead of deliverables? She turned her face toward the fire, concealing whatever expression had momentarily escaped her control. The wrist splint held, the fire burned steadily. Outside, the storm raged, as if it had personal grievances against the entire state of Montana. The cabin became its own self-contained little world. The firelight, the only thing standing between them and the all-consuming darkness. Audrey hated this. She hated the loss of control. She hated depending on a stranger. Every instinct screamed at her to take charge, establish dominance, create structure. But here, in this primitive space, those instincts were useless. "We should wait for dawn before trying the highway," Liam said. It wasn't a suggestion, simply a statement of fact, delivered without any hint of authority, which somehow made it even more convincing. Audrey wanted to argue, but the wind howling through the cracks in the walls made her point moot. "In my world, efficiency determines who stays," Audrey said. Liam poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling upward. "In my world, everyone deserves to get home." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Audrey thought of her father, Chairman George Sterling, who had always told her that leadership meant being willing to be cold, meant making the tough decisions that others were too weak to make. She had built her career on that principle, worn it like a suit of armor. But here, watching this stranger tend a fire to keep her alive, the armor felt surprisingly thin. When the flames began to die down, Liam pulled something from his pocket, a hand warmer made from a Ziploc bag filled with a salt solution and a heat pack. It was improvised, imperfect, and exactly what she needed. He placed it against her good hand, and Audrey stared at his calloused palms. These hands that fixed things, that saved things, that knew how to be useful without seeking any recognition. In the firelight, she saw safety, the kind of security that money couldn't buy, and for just a moment she allowed herself to feel it. Liam had a notebook in his truck and had grabbed it when he retrieved the emergency kit. Old habits from his engineering days meant he still sketched systems, still thought in diagrams. While Audrey dozed fitfully, he flipped through pages of generator schematics for the plant, notes about aging safety valves, and observations about equipment that should have been replaced 3 budget cycles ago. One notation stood out, written in his precise hand. Safety valve C7, install 1980, 3 years past service life. Recommend replacement before winter load increase. He'd submitted that recommendation 4 months ago. It had vanished into the bureaucratic void, probably dying on someone's desk, probably filed under not urgent enough to fund. Dawn came slowly, grey light filtering through the gaps in the cabin walls. The storm had exhausted itself sometime during the dark hours, leaving behind a world buried under 2 feet of fresh snow. Search and rescue vehicles appeared on the highway, their lights cutting through the morning gloom. Audrey sat up, wincing at the pain in her wrist, and felt the red flannel coat slide from her shoulders. She'd slept in a stranger's jacket, under a stranger's protection, and that vulnerability felt more dangerous than the storm had been. "I owe you," she said, standing up with effort. Liam shook his head, already gathering their meager supplies. "Just stay warm another night." The rescue team loaded Audrey into their vehicle. Someone draped an emergency blanket over her shoulders, but she kept the red flannel coat close, unable to bring herself to return it just yet. Through the rear window, she watched Liam climb back into his ancient pickup truck, watched him drive toward town, toward his daughter, toward a life she couldn't imagine living. She didn't know his last name, didn't know what he did or where he worked. For a few hours, she'd just been Audrey, and he'd just been Liam, and that simplicity felt like something precious she'd lost long ago. Liam made it to the plant just before his shift started. The night crew was already assembling, men and women with lunch pails and tired eyes, people who worked while the world slept. He poured himself a cup of cheap coffee from the break room and taped Bridget's latest drawing to his locker, the one with the fireplace, and those words she loved. Warm beats storm. His phone buzzed. It was an email from management. 9:30 a.m. CEO inspection. All senior staff and department leads required in conference room B. He'd never met the CEO, had only seen her in company newsletters, professional headshots that made her look untouchable. He drained his coffee, pulled on his work coveralls, and headed to the floor. Whatever corporate theatre was about to unfold, he had equipment to maintain. Conference room B smelled like fear and furniture polish. The night shift supervisors stood in awkward clusters, uncertain whether to sit or stand. Then the door opened, and Audrey Sterling walked in, wearing a burgundy business suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun, her eyes like winter ice. The room stood at attention. Liam felt the floor tilt beneath him. Audrey's gaze swept across the assembled faces, professional and detached, until it landed on Liam. For half a heartbeat, something flickered in her expression. Shock, recognition, and something else. But then it was gone, replaced by the mask she wore like a second skin. Clinton Morris launched into his presentation, spreadsheets projected on the wall, charts showing labor costs in angry red. Henry Blake emphasized overtime expenditures, talking about burning money on redundant coverage. The night shift, he explained with clinical precision, was where inefficiency thrived. A document flashed on the screen, too quickly for most to read, but Liam caught his own name scrolling past. Test reduction targets, the header read. His stomach went cold. Otis Palmer, grey-haired and solid as old timber, pushed back. You cut maintenance. You're gambling with safety. This equipment is 40 years old. It needs experienced eyes on it. Equipment has diagnostic systems, Clinton countered smoothly. We can't justify legacy staffing based on outdated protocols. Audrey sat at the head of the table, her bandaged wrist hidden beneath the sleek cuff of her jacket. She looked at that wrist and felt the phantom pressure of Liam's hands creating a splint from scraps. On her notepad she'd written, "Cut night maintenance." But now her pen hovered over it, hesitant. She crossed it out. Nobody noticed. The inspection tour began with Audrey moving through the plant like a general reviewing her troops, clipboard in hand, checklist at the ready, questions delivered in rapid-fire succession. Liam was assigned to assist, to answer technical queries and demonstrate systems. He kept his responses short, professional, and accurate. When she asked about hydraulic pressure tolerances, he gave her exact numbers. When she questioned maintenance intervals, he cited the manual from memory. Then they reached Sector 7, where a coolant line was leaking fluid. The vendor quote for the repair sat on someone's desk, still pending approval, 3 weeks old. Liam grabbed a spare compression clamp from the parts cage, adjusted the fitting with practiced efficiency, and sealed the leak in under 20 minutes. "Why didn't you call the vendor?" Audrey asked. "Because we could fix it ourselves in 20 minutes, Liam replied, wiping his hands on a rag. "Saved about $2,400 and 3 days of downtime." Clinton appeared from nowhere, like a shark sensing blood. He improvised, bypassed proper procurement channels. Audrey turned to Liam. "Write up your method. Include safety verification on my desk by the end of the shift." Liam nodded and walked away to find paper. He wrote by hand, in clear block letters, each step documented with the kind of precision that came from understanding that details mattered, that someone's life might depend on following the process correctly. The report was thorough, professional, and undeniably competent. His phone rang during the write-up. It was Bridget's teacher. His daughter had won the school science fair, first place for her recycled materials turbine. Pride flooded through him, pure and bright. Audrey was nearby, close enough to see his face transform. For just a second, the ice in her expression melted. Then she rebuilt it, brick by brick, because CEOs didn't get distracted by employees' personal victories. But she'd seen it, and she couldn't unsee it. The gas line in the casting sector had been problematic for weeks, with pressure sensors throwing intermittent warnings that maintenance logged but couldn't replicate. The vendor had provided budget sensors approved by Clinton Morris himself as a cost-saving measure. They worked 98% of the time. The other 2% of the time, they lied. At 2:15 in the afternoon, while the day shift hummed with the normal production noise, the sensor reported, "All clear." The pressure gauge told a different story, but the gauge was old, analog, the kind of thing people had learned to mistrust in favor of digital readouts. Clinton stood in the observation booth, watching production numbers climb. "Don't stop the line," he told the floor supervisor. "We're losing $120,000 per hour when we're down." Safety valve C7, installed in 1983, began to whistle. It was just a small sound, easily missed under the industrial din, but Liam heard it. That particular pitch meant pressure was building where it shouldn't. He hit the emergency stop, pulled the alarm that shut down the casting line. Clinton's voice exploded through the radio. "Who authorized that shutdown? What valve's critical?" Liam shouted back. "We need to!" The explosion wasn't large, not by industrial standards. It was just a pressure release, a burst of flame, white smoke billowing across the sector, but it was enough. Equipment worth $600,000 sat within the blast radius. More importantly, 12 people worked in that space. Liam grabbed a soaked blanket from the safety station, held it over his head, and ran toward the smoke. Through the haze, he saw Audrey frozen in the observation corridor, too close to the rupture. She was staring at the flames with the blank expression of someone watching their theories incinerate in real time. He reached her, wrapped the blanket around them both, and pulled her toward the exit. His arms seared where a spark had caught him, but he didn't let go. They stumbled into clear air, Audrey coughing. Liam's jacket was smouldering on the chair in her temporary office. The red flannel coat still hung where she'd left it. In the medical bay, Audrey's hands shook as she poured water for Liam. He sat on the examination table, shirt off, burn gel applied to his forearm. He tried to make a joke. Coffee would be better. She didn't laugh. "Why do you keep saving me?" Liam looked at her directly, no artifice, no calculation. "Because you're a person." Something in Audrey's carefully constructed worldview cracked wide open. All her theories about efficiency, about metrics, about who deserved what, scattered like ash in the wind. This man, this night shift mechanic, who should have been a line item on a termination list, had just risked his life for hers, and he'd done it without hesitation, without expecting a reward, without even thinking about it. The emergency board meeting convened within the hour, executives dialing in from 3 time zones, their voices tense and accusatory through the speakerphone. Henry Blake led the prosecution. Unauthorized shutdown, false alarm, estimated losses exceeding $90,000 in delayed production. Clinton had his narrative ready, polished and poisonous. This is exactly the kind of reactive, non-protocol behavior that makes night maintenance a liability. Carter acted on instinct, not data. Amanda Pierce from Human Resources laid out the paperwork. Performance issue, forms pre-populated with legal language, ready for signatures, the machinery of termination grinding forward with bureaucratic efficiency. Audrey sat at the conference table, staring at her bandaged wrist. She thought about the cabin, about hands making splints from scraps. She thought about the fire that had kept her alive and the fire that could have killed a dozen workers. She thought about the difference between data and truth. "I need 48 hours, she said. Henry's face went rigid. "Safety investigation." "Full review before any personnel action." Clinton opened his mouth to object, but Audrey cut him off with a look that could freeze nitrogen. 48 hours. If we fire someone for preventing a disaster and it turns out he was right, We'll face lawsuits that make today's losses look like pocket change. It was a language they understood. Risk management, liability mitigation. She was learning to speak their dialect while meaning something entirely different. That night, she called her father, Chairman George Sterling. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment he'd perfected over decades. "Don't go soft," he said. "Leadership means making hard choices." Audrey looked at the burn patterns on her jacket sleeve, at the medical report documenting Liam's injury. What if the hard choice is admitting we're wrong? Her father had no answer for that. The next morning, Liam submitted his resignation letter, 2 sentences on plant stationery. "Effective immediately, I resign my position. I won't let anyone sacrifice their principles for my sake." He left it on Audrey's desk and walked out. Audrey and Otis Palmer spent 16 hours in the maintenance records room, pulling files that hadn't been opened in months. The safety valve logs told a story, if you knew how to read them. Pressure anomalies dating back 4 months, all documented, all ignored. The sensor purchase orders revealed more. Clinton had approved the budget vendor over engineering recommendations, saved $42,000 on equipment, and buried the objections under procedural language. His emails were the final piece. Messages to Amanda about accelerating headcount reduction to offset equipment costs. It was casual brutality dressed in corporate speak. But the smoking gun was the valve itself. When they brought in an independent inspector, he dated it to 1983, confirmed it was 3 years past its safe operational life. Liam's maintenance notes had flagged it. His recommendation had been clear. It had died on Clinton's desk, marked non-critical, defer to next budget. Audrey drove to Liam's address, a trailer park on the edge of town where rent was cheap and maintaining dignity was a hard-won battle. The trailer was small but immaculate, with flower boxes in the windows and a satellite dish pointing toward the stars. Bridget answered the door, this tiny person with serious eyes and a gap-toothed smile. She was holding a drawing still wet with marker ink, the familiar fireplace and those 3 words, "Warm beats storm." "Are you my dad's boss?" Bridget asked with the directness of children who haven't learned to lie yet. "I am," Audrey said. Bridget studied her for a long moment, then held out the drawing. "He says warm always wins, even when the storm is really, really big." Audrey took the drawing with hands that weren't quite steady. She knelt down to Bridget's level. "Your dad is right. He's very right." Liam appeared behind his daughter, saw Audrey, and started to close the door, but Audrey spoke first. "I need you to come back, not to your old job, but to lead the emergency systems restoration, a full protocol review. You write the new standards." Liam shook his head. "I'm not interested in being anyone's token redemption." "This isn't redemption," Audrey said. "It's recognition. The plant needs someone who sees problems before they pick up on things sensors do. Someone who will hit the alarm even when it costs 6 figures. Someone who understands that numbers don't bleed." Over the next 36 hours, Liam worked with a hand-picked team to methodically restore and upgrade the safety systems. He replaced valve C7, recalibrated the entire sensor array, and wrote new standard operating procedures in language that assumed competence rather than compliance. His recommendation was simple: stagger shifts to ensure overlap. Experienced eyes on every piece of critical equipment. The production line restarted on hour 47. Every system ran clean, every gauge read true. And the cost of Liam's solution was 63% less than Clinton's budget projections. The math was undeniable. The truth was unavoidable. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. All members present, no remote attendance allowed. Audrey stood at the head of the table with a laptop, a stack of maintenance logs, and absolutely nothing left to lose. She walked them through it, the video footage of the near miss, the sensor data proving the alarm was justified, the email trail showing how cost-cutting had created the crisis, and the opportunity cost analysis showing that Liam's shutdown had prevented an estimated $4.2 million in equipment damage, along with incalculable costs from potential human injury. Clinton Morris sat silent, watching his carefully constructed narrative collapse. Henry Blake's expression went from stern to carefully neutral. As the liability implications became clear, Amanda Pierce quietly withdrew the performance issue documentation. The failure, Audrey said, her voice steady and clear, was in leadership, in choosing metrics over safety, in valuing efficiency over wisdom. Clinton Morse approved substandard equipment and suppressed engineering recommendations. That ends today. The vote was unanimous. Clinton was suspended pending a full audit. The vendor contracts were under review, and Audrey stood before the board with a new proposal. I'm creating a new position, night shift engineering supervisor, not based on credentials but on demonstrated expertise and judgment under pressure. I'm appointing Liam Carter. One board member objected. He doesn't have the degree. He has something better, Audrey replied. He has the courage to stop the machine when the machine is wrong. The announcement was made on the plant floor. All shifts assembled. Audrey stood on the loading dock, looking at faces weathered by years of work, eyes skeptical from years of broken promises. The person who saved this plant, she said, was someone we almost threw away, someone we almost fired for having the audacity to be right when the data was wrong. That changes now. We build systems around wisdom, not the other way around. The applause started slow, then built, rolling across the floor like thunder. Liam stood in the back, overwhelmed, and when Otis Palmer clapped him on the shoulder, he finally let himself believe it was real. In the shadows near the executive entrance, George Sterling watched. His daughter had defied everything he'd taught her about cold calculations and hard choices, and standing there, seeing her transform corporate loyalty into genuine respect, he felt something he hadn't expected: pride. 3 months later, the Montana plant celebrated 90 consecutive days without safety incidents, a record that made industry publications and sent Sterling Dynamics stock up 4%. Local media praised the company's revolutionary safety culture, and corporate sent photographers to document the success. But the real story was smaller, quieter. Bridget Carter won the regional science competition with a wind turbine built from plant scrap metal, each piece donated and documented. Audrey established a STEM scholarship fund for local kids. No press release, no logo, just money that let dreams become engineering degrees. On a Friday evening, as spring began pushing back winter, Liam grilled burgers in the trailer park's common area. Bridget ran between tables, explaining turbine blade angles to anyone who'd listen. Otis Palmer brought potato salad and stories from 40 years inside those plant walls. and Audrey Sterling sat on a picnic bench wearing jeans and the red flannel coat, looking more at peace than a CEO had any right to be. "First time I felt warm for the right reasons," she said quietly, watching fire dance in the portable grill. Liam handed her a burger, their fingers touching briefly. "Storms still come, but we've got fire now." In the distance, the Montana plant hummed its steady rhythm, lights glowing against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, Liam's handwritten safety protocols were taped to equipment, reminders that wisdom and efficiency could coexist, that the right person in the right moment could save more than numbers could measure. Bridget brought her drawing over, the one Audrey had kept, now laminated and worn from being carried everywhere. The fireplace still glowed in crayon orange, the words still clear. "Warm beats storm." Audrey looked at those words, at this makeshift family that had formed around second chances and split-second decisions. She thought about the person she'd been in that cabin, stripped of title and authority, just someone who needed saving. She thought about the person she was becoming, someone who understood that the strongest structures were built on trust, not spreadsheets. Snow still crowned the mountains in the distance, but here in the valley, fire kept the darkness back. Not the consuming kind, not the destructive kind, the kind that gathered people close, that turned strangers into something like home, the kind that wins. They're sensitive to the warning signs that equipment might miss. You need someone who isn't afraid to sound the alarm, even if it's a costly decision, someone who understands that numbers on a spreadsheet don't represent real-world consequences. So, over the next day and a half, Liam assembled a carefully chosen team to meticulously overhaul the safety systems. He replaced valve C7, fine-tuned all the sensors, and rewrote the safety procedures, making them clear and easy to follow for anyone who knew their job. His main suggestion was pretty straightforward. Stagger the work shifts to make sure there was always overlap and experienced personnel keeping a close watch on all the critical equipment. The production line was back up and running by hour 47. Everything was running smoothly, and all the gauges were reading exactly as they should. And get this, Liam's solution cost 63% less than what Clinton had originally projected. The numbers didn't lie. The truth couldn't be ignored. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. Everyone had to be there in person. No virtual attendance allowed. Audrey stood at the head of the table with her laptop, a stack of maintenance reports, and nothing left to hold her back. She laid everything out for them, step by step, the video footage showing just how close they'd come to disaster, the data from the sensors that proved the alarm had been justified, the string of emails that clearly demonstrated how cutting corners had led to the crisis, and the analysis showing that Liam's quick thinking had prevented an estimated $4.2 million in damages, not to mention the potential for even greater losses if anyone had been injured. Clinton Morris sat there in silence, watching his carefully crafted explanation crumble before his eyes. Henry Blake's face went from stern to carefully non-committal, and as the potential legal ramifications sank in, Amanda Pierce quietly took back the paperwork regarding Liam's supposed performance issues. The problem, Audrey stated, her voice steady and clear, was a failure of leadership, prioritizing numbers over people's safety and valuing efficiency over sound judgment. Clinton Morse had approved the use of substandard equipment and brushed aside the engineers' concerns, and that, she declared, ends today. The vote was unanimous. Clinton was suspended pending a full investigation. The vendor contracts were being reviewed, and Audrey presented the board with a new idea. "I want to create a new position, night shift engineering supervisor. And I want to fill it based not on academic credentials, but on proven skills and the ability to make good decisions under pressure. I'm recommending Liam Carter for the job." One of the board members raised an objection. "He doesn't have the right degree." Audrey responded, "He has something even better, the courage to shut things down when he knows something is wrong." The announcement was made right there on the factory floor. Everyone from every shift was there. Audrey stood on the loading dock, looking out at the faces of the workers, weathered by years of hard work and marked by the skepticism that comes from years of empty promises. "The person who saved this plant," she said, "was someone we almost let go, someone we nearly fired for having the nerve to be right when the data was wrong. That's going to change, starting now. We're going to build our systems around good judgment, not the other way around." The applause started slowly, but it grew, sweeping across the floor like a wave. Liam stood in the back, completely taken aback. And when Otis Palmer clapped him on the shoulder, he finally allowed himself to believe that it was all really happening. Standing in the shadows near the entrance for the executives, George Sterling watched. His daughter had gone against everything he had taught her about making calculated decisions and tough choices, but seeing her transform company loyalty into genuine respect, he felt something completely unexpected: pride. 3 months later, the Montana plant celebrated a milestone: 90 consecutive days without any safety incidents. It was a record that caught the attention of industry publications and sent Sterling Dynamics stock soaring by 4%. Local news praised the company's new approach to safety, and the corporate office sent photographers to capture the success. But the real story was smaller, quieter. Bridget Carter won the regional science competition with a wind turbine she'd built using scrap metal from the plant, with each donated part carefully documented. Audrey also created a scholarship fund for local kids who wanted to study science and engineering. No press releases, no logos, just money to help make dreams of engineering degrees come true. One Friday evening, as spring was starting to push winter aside, Liam was grilling burgers in the common area of the trailer park. Bridget was running from table to table, enthusiastically explaining the details of wind turbine blade angles to anyone who would listen. Otis Palmer brought the potato salad and shared stories from his 40 years working inside those plant walls. And Audrey Sterling sat on a picnic table, wearing jeans and a red flannel jacket, looking more relaxed than any CEO had a right to be. "This is the first time I've felt warm for the right reasons," she said softly, watching the flames dance in the portable grill. Liam handed her a burger, their fingers briefly touching. "The storms will still come," he said, "but now we've got some fire to fight back with." In the distance, the Montana plant hummed along, its lights shining against the darkening sky. Somewhere inside, Liam's handwritten safety guidelines were taped to the equipment, a reminder that good judgment and efficiency can go hand in hand, and that the right person in the right moment can do more good than any numbers can ever measure. Bridget then came over with her drawing, the one that Audrey had kept, now laminated and worn from being carried around everywhere. The fireplace was still glowing with its crayon orange flames, and the words were still clear: "Warm beats storm." Audrey looked at those words, at this family that had come together because of second chances and split-second decisions. She thought about who she had been in that cabin, stripped of her title and power, just someone in need of help, and she thought about who she was becoming. Someone who realized that the strongest structures are built on trust, not spreadsheets. The mountains in the distance were still capped with snow. But there in the valley, the fire kept the darkness at bay, not the destructive kind of fire, but the kind that brings people together, that turns strangers into a family, the kind of fire that wins